everyone. I know we've been on a break. We took a 1 month hiatus, just trying to deal with other stuff, but we are back. Welcome to Kojo's Corner, where we are at the corner of politics, people, participation, and power. Today, on episode 3, we are talking with Dr. Zachary Spicer, an associate professor at York's University School of Public Policy and Administration. He previously served as the Director of Research and Outreach with the Institute of Public Administration of Canada and as an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Brock University. We are happy to have him here today. And today we are talking strictly municipal politics, at least across Ontario and hopefully maybe across Canada. And we wanted to start with Ontario. So, as many of you know, maybe it's old news now, but we still think it's important. In Ontario right now, a couple of municipalities have the strong mayor's power, including Hamilton. And so, Dr. Spicer, we wanted to get your assessment of how these strong mayor powers are going to work, and what your initial assessment is on if it's going to be effective, how you think some of these mayors that have this power are going to utilize this or not.
Certainly. So happy to chat about that. I think that there's a bunch of different issues that we could get into with the strong mayor powers. I would say off the top, just generally, I think with everything in life, there's good and bad, right? I think that there's obviously a lot to be concerned about with the strong mayor legislation as it's written. We're just now getting to see some of it in action. We had a bit of a preview with the mayors of Ottawa and the mayors of Toronto. um, Today, actually, there was kind of an interesting case where the mayor of Caledon decided that she was going to replace the CAO. So she wrote up what's called the mayor's power document. She just decided that the existing CAO was out and she was going to hire someone else. So she literally just put someone else in. Right? There was no consultation with council. There was no recruitment process. There wasn't job interviews or anything like that. And so I can see how a lot of people would be very concerned about that. Right? From my perspective, it was interesting how quickly it happened. Given that when you hire a CAO, there's usually a very lengthy recruitment process. You usually use a search firm. You usually have a short list of several candidates, but in this case, there wasn't. I think, fortunately, the person who was brought in is a professional public servant who served as a CAO elsewhere. But you can see a scenario where the mayor could bring in someone who she used to do business with, or she knew from a previous partner life, or she has a personal relationship with, or something along those lines. So I can see how some people would be very concerned with something like that. So I think there's a number of dimensions here, right? The mayor's relationship with council, I think, is going to be very, very different, and of course, the mayor's relationship with the administration within the city, I think, is going to be very, very different. So if we just take that Caledon example, I'm not sure how the staff are really going to react, right? One day you have a boss, and the other day she's gone, and someone new is in there, right? So, and there really isn't a lot of information about how that person was picked or anything along those lines. So all to say, we're just kind of getting into a world where these powers are starting to be used. We have certain mayors who said that they are not going to use them, and that they've delegated some of those responsibilities back to council and back to the CAO. So the mayor of Kingston has done that, it's all to say we'll see. There's a lot of different municipalities out there, and a lot of different mayors who have very different attitudes about this. So it's tough to say, which municipalities are going to go which way. Then, of course, when we get the next cycle of elections, we may get some new mayors who have very different ideas about how to use these powers. Some may not, right? So I'll say we'll have to see.
hmm So, for those watching, CAO is Chief Administration Officer. In some municipalities, that would be the city manager, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
No, no, it's all good.
important to clarify.
It's all good. So that's one example, right? Where
Mhm.
you're talking about picking the city manager, chief administrative officer. I think here in Hamilton, there's a process. Our city
Yep.
manager is retiring effective. I think leaving in October, so a process will be in place. So, what other areas do you think certain mayors might be tempted to use this power? I mean, as you said, there are some mayors that have said we are not going to use it, but hey, it's just 2023. There's still 3 more years, so things can
Mhm.
change. And between you and I, we know politics definitely changes quickly.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's the thing. I think that there's a lot of mayors who said, "Hey, I'm not going to use that. You use this power, that power." I think that there's best of intentions happening, but the important thing to know about both these bills, Bill 3 and Bill 39, that ultimately grant these powers, that they also provide a list of responsibilities for the mayor, right? So municipalities can't opt out of this legislation, but the mayor can choose not to use them. But there are responsibilities that come along with it. So, for instance, the mayor has responsibility to table the budget, right? Which means that there's a lot of people looking to the mayor of a number of cities for some direction and leadership around the budget, right? So what sort of budget is this? How's it framed? Is it an austerity budget? Is this a investment budget in say social services or infrastructure or something along those lines, right? So with that said, if the public is looking to the mayor for something in the budget, like either lower taxes or more investment or something along those lines, it's going to be very, very tempting for the mayor to say, well, I'm going to be out there on the hustings in a couple of years asking for votes, and people are going to say, well, you had to control the budget and you didn't lower my taxes or whatever. They're going to be quite tempted to use some of these powers, right? And I think that um, it is going to be tempting to say, well, I have a certain idea about how the municipality should look and feel, and I know some great candidates who could do, this job or that job. I can override the hiring process here. I can dig pretty deep into the organization, and there's a lot of directors and managers that the mayor could fire, right, or hire, or they can change the structure of the organization. So I think people will be looking to them for leadership in certain areas and say, well, ultimately you have responsibility over X, Y, and Z, so why didn't you get it done, right?
Mhm,
And so I think it will be tempting to use some of these powers because mayors say, well, I have a corresponding responsibility, right? There's some corresponding accountability there coming from various angles, right? And the whole idea of this legislation on paper is to build housing, of course, but I think when you look at Doug Ford's sort of idea about the mayor, he really views the mayor as a central accountability actor within government. So not to get too much on like a rant here. I'm sure you have other questions, but in 2017, the premier wrote a book called Ford Nation. I'm not sure if you've checked it out or not, but it's a bit of a biography of his brother Rob and their time in office.
mhm,
Um, Doug Ford as a counselor and Rob as mayor, of course. But he talks a lot about how the system works in Chicago, and how a strong mayor system would be beneficial. This is one of the first things he would do if he ever got the power as premier, was to change this, because he said that, well, like accountability should be with one person. So if you don't like the way the city's going, if the economy is in the tank and you think that public services are failing, you should be able to, and he uses the words, fire the mayor, right? So I think that he has this notion that like there should be one person who you can point to and say things are not going well. It is this person's fault. We need a brand new start, and it's time for a brand new mayor, right? And so if that's the intent, I think a lot of mayors are going to feel like, well, I kind of got a bullseye in my back here. I have a target in my back, right? If I'm going to be blamed for everything, I need to start be able to take control of things, right? So I think that's where we're going to see the mayors using some of these powers, as we've seen with the mayor of Caledon with that CAO swap. Some of
mhm.
them are not going to really be afraid at all to use them, right?
Mhm. So, and that's very interesting. I might have to read that. I haven't read it, so I'll put it on my summer book list. But you raised an interesting point, and let me get your assessment on this. So, as somebody who is into public administration, do you think uh uh the motivation behind that is something that's still valid and needs more tweaking, or do you think the mayoral system prior to this strong mayors legislation is something that's is still good? You know what I mean? Like, where how would you analyze this strictly from a public administration academic view?
Sure. I mean, from a couple of perspectives here. I mean, as a former public servant, I mean, I've worked with the province of Ontario for a number of years. So as someone putting up back on my, know, bureaucratic hat here, I would be a little bit concerned that the mayor would have quite a bit of power over hiring and firing and restructuring government, right? So I think that I would be a little bit concerned that there's a number of people who would owe their jobs directly to the mayor, or would think that, hey, if I don't get something right, and if I upset the mayor in some way, I could lose my job, right? I think if you are a CAO, city manager at this point in time, your relationship with the mayor and council is changing quite a bit, right? So you're thinking to yourself, well, do I serve the mayor? Do I serve council? What's my reporting relationship? But realistically, is if you want to keep your job, it seems now you have to please the mayor, right?
Mhm.
So if you are the new CEO of Caledon, I know I keep going back to that example tonight, but if you are that person, right, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, saw what happened the last CIO. I better make sure that I understand the mayor's agenda, I understand what the mayor wants, and I better figure out a way to get it done, right?
Mhm.
Which is a little bit different than it was before. Obviously, you have to keep some of the major political actors happy, and you have to listen to them and aggregate what council is saying and what council wants. But the reporting relationship is very different, right?
Mhm.
And if you remember council, you would probably be a little bit concerned about this as well, right? That the mayor's office is able to pull levers in a number of different ways, right? On the sort of beneficial side, my colleague Gabriel Edelman at the University of Toronto made this point at an event when the legislation first came out. He made a point about the budget, right? And he said that having more central accountability around the budget is probably a good thing. And he made a quite a convincing argument. There's a paper put out by the Institute of Municipal Finance and Governance about this that was basically a summary of their discussion. I think it's quite good. It comes at things from a number of different angles, but Gabe makes the point that the city budget, it was really one of those documents that everyone had responsibility for, so nobody really had responsibility for, right? It's initiated by staff traditionally, right?
Yes.
So I mean, it's coming forward and it's getting, it serves a bunch of different interests within the city, and then it goes to council, and you get everyone's 2 cents on spending priorities, and you kind of have to, you kind of have to get something in there for everyone. Every ward kind of gets something, and it becomes this sort of mismatch of kind of priorities, and it really isn't a lot of centralization. And when you look at, let's say, the federal government or the provincial government, when it's budget time, the budgets have themes, right? And so the budgets kind of give you a sense of, what the government's priorities are for the next year.
Mhm.
Are we investing in infrastructure? Are we, getting jobs programs up and running? Are we cutting the deficit, lowering taxes, whatever it might be, right? Budgets at other levels of government have themes, right? They have a thematic focus, and you can tell exactly, what the government's up to, whether you agree with it or not. You know what's going to happen. And so, if you are staff, you're saying, okay, I can tell by the budget what's going to happen, right? And so Gabe made the point that, well, it's probably not a bad idea to have someone who is accountable for that process and seeing it through, who is going to initiate a budget, and that the budget could be more of a reflection of some of those centralized priorities, that it could have a bit of a thematic focus. So I think there is something there to that, right? So from an administrative perspective, having more accountability on certain items within municipal governance could be a good thing, right? On the other hand, having a mayor who has their hands on everything could probably be a bad thing. And now we kind of have a kind of this this kind of smorgasbord of mayors, some of whom are very engaged with these powers, some of whom are not, and so it creates for a somewhat messy landscape, right? If you are someone who works in municipal government, right? If you're thinking about taking a job in Hamilton or Mississauga or Brampton or something like that, you're thinking to yourself, how is the mayor approaching these
Yeah.
strong mayor powers? How are they using them? And then am I going to get in there? Then a year later, they're just going to take my entire department and slash it or something like that. So you're thinking about some of these things a little bit more than what you did before, I think.
Hmm. Can let's stay on this budget, because I think that budget discussion is very interesting, because you're right. When the budget time comes, it is so difficult to understand what is being prioritized and what is not being prioritized. For those of you in Hamilton, if you pay close attention, 1 minute they are funding something, the next minute they are not funding anything, and then nobody knows what's going on. So, if can that budget piece be done without having the strong mayor's power? Because let's face it, and I mean, we'll talk about this. Everybody's going to face an increase in taxes, whether they like it or not. So, uh, who then are we going to blame? Because everybody's going to say, I want to lower the taxes, but in reality, if there's no one to blame, then how are we making sure the budget is doing what people want?
I think that's a very, very good question. And so, what we kind of have now, we have this sort of collective budgeting exercise, is that when we get back out to election period and councilors are going door to door, and someone says, "Hey, councilor X, Y, or Z, my taxes went up 4% last year. What's going on?" He or she can say, "Hey, I fought for you. I tried my best. It's those tax and spend counselors, the rest of them. They're the ones who are taking money out of your pocket. I'm the one who wants to keep it in."
Yes,
But
there
then
you go.
then they can go to the next door and someone says, "Hey, like I asked you for years about to fix this road. My kid needs better schools. I need better parks. Like this, everything's falling apart. Like why were taxes only kept at 3%? Hey, I fought for you. I fought. It's the other counselors who want this austerity budget, right? I'm doing my best down there, right? Send me back there. Let me keep fighting for you,
Yeah,
right? And so
yeah.
so I think it's just like, and that's just municipal budgeting, right? Is that everyone kind of does that, right? Um, and then one of the big challenges too is that municipal governments are very open policy environments, right? So staff have a lot of input over the direction of projects. Political staff, so the mayor staff in certain cities will always complain about the prep projects that they're caught off guard about and stuff like that. So if you are a policy professional within municipal government, especially in a larger city, you have quite a bit of ability to influence the policy agenda of that city, right? If you think that you have a great program going on that's helping people, you can resource it in a way that federal public servants and provincial public servants can't, right?
Hmm.
Because the agenda is centralized. So I think that in a way that's good, right? So if you're working in say housing or social services, and you have a program that is working, you can build that into the budget by through internal processes, right?
Hmm.
Um, with that said, if some public servants are very attached to inefficient programs, right? Some of which keep their departments running and stuff like that. And so sometimes you get very status quo budgets, right? Where the budget looks very similar to the previous year, right?
Hmm.
And the budget's presented, and when counselors ask about this or that, the department heads are just like, well, listen, that's a program that's helping people. If you say no to this, you're firing six staff members or something like that. And they go, okay, well, we don't want to do that,
Hmm.
right? So you kind of get the status quo where the budget kind of rolls over every year, and counselors really are kind of tweaking around the margins a bit, right?
Yes.
And this is particularly jarring for first time counselors who are getting into the budget process, and they have campaign platforms that they ran on. They ran door to door and said, like, this is why I'm running, and these are people who ran for office because they want to see things change, right?
Yeah.
So they get there and they're like, I can't change anything because I can't change this budget because this document is set in stone and like 80% of it is salaries, and I'm not going to go in there and start slashing and burning because the other counselors are like, listen, you just got here, settle
Mm-hmm.
down. The staff are doing the heavy lifting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe you get one or two things done, right? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's success to you, right? So we get these status quo budgets, and so it's all collectively done. There's a lot of staff input. There's very little ability for newer counselors who have a change agenda to kind of tweak around the margins a bit. So it's tough. Like the budget process is tough, and it's frustrating, especially to people who want to do things quickly, right? So how many cities are stuck in a housing crisis right now? Who are like, there's an affordability crisis, there's a housing crisis, a homelessness crisis, there's an addiction crisis, and people are screaming, we need help in this area, that area, we need to do something quickly. And it comes to budget time, and you're like, sorry, the budget has already been set by staff.
Mm-hmm.
So, we can maybe do a little outreach program. Maybe that will help you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, you're coming in, you're thinking like, we need big seismic change.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
budget's saying no. The budget says no right off the bat. So it can be very, very frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's dive into maybe I'll make this a two-part question. So we've talked about budgets. Um, in the next year, whether it's Hamilton, whether it's Burlington, whether it's Toronto, just name any city, they are going to see a tax increase.
Yeah.
We can't, let's not mince words here. What do you think can be done to ensure that these increases are again, responding to the needs of residents and tackling some of the things that you've already mentioned, and what the main issues are that municipalities are facing? How can we merge those two, right? Because you have residents saying, hey, we need more cycling infrastructure, we need more action on climate change initiatives. This summer has been very evident of that. We need more housing. We need um, better ways of running our city efficiently. Even to throw another wrench in, I know QP 5167, they are having bargaining right now. That might also impact budget discussion. So how do we merge these two things that always create um angst for counselors, for city staff, and for residents?
It's a great question. I'm afraid I'm not going to have a great answer, but yeah, I think one of the things to sort of keep in mind is that we always think of budget time as this sort of like 2 month window, right, where it's being debated, right? Budget time is really a sort of 12-month process, right? Municipal budgeting works in a very different way than we see at the federal or provincial level, in the sense that in the feds and the provincial cases, when you're dealing with income taxes, you are putting a rate out and you're seeing what happens. Like maybe we get more money, maybe we get less money. The economy could dip, everyone could lose their job, and our best revenue projections are not out there, right? When we're dealing with property tax, we know how many properties we have. We know the class of properties, so we really just have to figure out how much money we actually want, and then we set the tax rate afterwards, right? So it's a little bit different, right? But we have a lot more certainty when it comes to figure out how much money we actually need, right? So with that said, I think it's just trying to figure out, trying to articulate what the city's priorities are from the very beginning. But it is incredibly tough to do in an amalgamated city like Hamilton. So what big amalgamated cities do very, very poorly is that they can't aggregate political interest well. And so governing a city like this it's a ton of noise, right? So you think of yourself as a counselor from any of the wards or for the mayor, right? you're getting shouted at about 1,000 different ways, right? And they have less information shortcuts to figure out, what people want, right? Federally and provincially, they have a ton of polling. They have a lot of insight that they can draw on. They have a ton of user data, right? Municipalities, from the policymaking perspective, in some cases, are flying blind, even some of the largest cities. So they need better intelligence. The mayor's office has a very small budget compared to the premier's office. So, like, if you want to know what do Hamiltonians think about X, Y, or Z, it's a lot harder for the mayor to say, "Well, I'm going to do some polling and figure it out," right? Um, so, with that said, the policy input is really the public, right? And what happens there is that in local politics, we have one group of people who are traditionally very noisy and more active than others, and those are homeowners. So myself and a colleague from Toronto Metropolitan University did a paper on home voters a number of years ago. We're basically looking at not just the voting attitudes, but the activity level of homeowners and renters. And homeowners are not shy about coming out to meetings, not shy about emailing counselors, about calling counselors, stuff like that, because what they're doing is they're protecting what is their largest uninsurable asset. And certainly you can insure your house against fire, flood, stuff like that, but you can't insure it against politics. So homeowners insure their home against politics by being more active in it.
Hmm.
So I would say if you are someone who is renting, if you're someone who is concerned about the climate crisis, if you're someone who's concerned about whatever might be homelessness, addiction issues, whatever it might be, you have to be as active. And unfortunately, you have to keep the message on every single day, and that can be exhausting. But you have to be sure that the homeowners who want to keep tax rates below the rate of inflation are going to be emailing counselors all year round. So I would say that the budget cycle never ends. The activism cycle never ends. It's going to keep on going around, but it's establishing priorities very early. Because it's very easy to put the status quo back in the window and say, here's the budget. 80% of it is already decided. Council, you can do whatever you want with the other 20. Best of luck to you, right?
Hmm.
Because when we get to that point, the deal's done, right?
Yeah.
So again, that's not a fantastic answer, but it's probably the best one I can get. I'm not sure if I have any fantastic insight on that point, unfortunately.
Hmm. So let's then turn now to, you do lots of great work, research, papers. What would you say? I don't want you to prioritize it based on numbers, but what would you say are kind of the main issues that all municipalities are facing right now? Don't mention housing. Housing we know, but other than housing.
Other than housing, well, I mean, it's tough to not mention housing. So I'll mention it quickly, then I'll move on. But housing is the issue, and it's not just a municipal issue; it's a multi-level issue, and we have to get it right to make everything else fit. Unfortunately, and so I would say one of the big things is that is finance. Municipalities are, let's say, cash strapped, but they're consistently being asked to do more and more and more with less and less and less. So I would say we have to have a very broad conversation about who does what. And so, who is doing what between the province and municipal governments and the federal government. So unfortunately, over the last 20 years, what we've seen is when higher orders of government don't want to do something, it consistently gets pushed down. And that's made municipalities more policy takers than policy makers. So when we talk about the budget being set and everything like that, it's not just set by staff. A lot of it's set by legislative mandate, right? Municipalities are forced to do things by the province, and they're forced to fund them. So there's less and less money to do things locally. There's less and less ability for municipalities to get up and say, well, we're going to solve problem X, Y, and Z, because they don't have the ability to do it. And so we can always increase property taxes. And you said property taxes are going up. Absolutely, they're going to go up every single year because that is the main funding vehicle for municipalities, right? And I think we need to have a very serious conversation a very multi-level conversation about who does what. And I think that means uploading more services to the province or coming up with some other fiscal arrangement because it's just going to get worse. And so I think that's the one thing that's affecting every municipality across the province, big and small. If they had some more money, if they had some more space to think about policy and think about service levels and to think about community care, they would be a lot better off. And so I think that we could solve a lot of our problems if we start thinking in that way. But it's a tough conversation to have, and it's not one that provincial and federal governments really want to have, right? Because that means that there's less money for them and there's more responsibility on them. So that's that would be my non-housing response, I think.
Hmm. So follow up to that. I think a couple of months ago I wrote an opinion piece in the Hamilton Spectator, and one of the suggestions there was that you know the way how the federal government has provincial transfers. For yeah, I was saying that, well, maybe it's time the federal government provide municipal transfers as a top up to the property taxes. Do you think that would be is that a plausible idea, or is pie in the sky?
It is challenging to do because the provinces have constitutional responsibility for municipalities. So the federal government has made some efforts in the past to get involved with municipal affairs. So we had the Minister of State for Urban Affairs in the 60s and 70s. We have the Minister of State for Infrastructure and Communities in the 2000s, which is now, I believe, Infrastructure Canada. So we have sort of tried to do that in a number of ways. The Minister of State for Urban Affairs was really rolled back because the provinces were getting very upset about municipalities being directly funded by the federal government. So I suspect we would see the same sort of hand wringing happening this time. But what the federal government really does is use spending power to influence policy direction. So say you can do X, Y, Z, but it's tied to whatever the federal goals in this particular area are. I think over the last 10 to 15 years, municipalities have been very good about articulating that there is really no exclusive domain, right? We have a constitutional structure that is fairly airtight in terms of policy domains, but there isn't really federal policy that doesn't affect municipal governments. You think about it, it's
Hmm.
fiscal policy, immigration policy, housing policy, right? Everything trickles down, right? So I think we can probably get into some conversation about tripartite agreements, transfers, things along those lines. But everything would have to be done with the provinces, and every single time that you're bringing money down, you are getting conditions, right? So I think it'd be great if we could think about some sort of unconditional grant, some regular unconditional grant. The gas tax, is certainly something like that in terms of infrastructure spending. Municipalities certainly appreciate that. I don't know if any federal or provincial government is really going to be super excited about, say, blank checks, but it's not out of the question. If we can all agree that there's a serious revenue crunch at the local level, I think we can maybe get creative with different solutions if we bring everyone to the table and we recognize what the problem actually looks like.
Hmm. So maybe this is a rhetorical question, but I'll still ask it anyways. So why isn't it done then? Like everybody understands that, yes, municipalities, I hate this term, but I'm gonna say it, are the creatures of the province. Okay, yes, I'm a creature, but they never provide the money, right? And then there's political posturing and rhetoric and all of that, and meanwhile, like, things, as you're saying, that the downloading is happening, and I would even argue that now political rhetoric has been heightened, and we are not even actually doing the discussions that need to be had, right? So why is it that they can't just sit in a room, come up with a solution, sign some contracts, bring the money down, and let the tire hit the road?
I don't know. I mean, I think we we certainly have multi-level meetings and things along those lines, but it is tough to get done. I'm Some days I'm not entirely sure myself. I think there's a couple things happening. So, from my vantage point as a former provincial public servant, I think that there's a couple things happening, right? So I think that there's not universal agreement amongst municipalities on having more power, having more money, things along those lines, right? So when we've got these sort of concerted campaigns to change the revenue structure, a lot of it has been on like the 1 cent campaign that David Miller championed, right? Give us 1% of the GST or something along those lines, right? So a lot of it comes down to sort of transferring money directly to municipalities, and of course, some of that is comes down to the fact that I would prefer not have to raise taxes myself. I'd like someone else to raise taxes and then just give me the money, right? So I think it's easier from a municipal perspective sometimes to simply blame other levels of government, right? Why are we so broke in the city? Well, the province and the feds just won't do it. They won't fix it up, right? So my earlier example about the counselor door to door, the same sort of thing applies, right? When people are asked, why don't you do more? Why aren't you fixing housing? Like, it's easier to throw your hands up and be like, you need to call your MP,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we got a lot of that when I work for the province. Is that we have municipalities that have additional revenue sources and are not using them, right? Toronto is a great example, right? They have revenue sources that designate them under the City of Toronto Act, and we've seen certain administrations roll them back. So Rob Ford rolled back the vehicle registration tax. It hasn't come back, right? Even though Toronto's as cash strapped as any other place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when they have the revenue sources, sometimes they're not eager to use them. It is easy to sort of paint the provincial and federal government as a scapegoat sometimes. Say, well, it's their fault, it's not ours, right? Increased policy responsibility, also comes with having to do more things, right? Not every municipality is super eager to take full control over every single policy domain. So I think that it is a bit of a two-way street, right? The province and the federal government isn't always willing to give things up. Municipalities are not always willing to take them on. And so I think we are sometimes just stuck in this position where we're just not moving forward because we can't figure out what we want at our own level of government.
Hmm. So let's stay hyper focused on Hamilton then. In Hamilton, what would you say? I know we are not the same as Toronto. They have their own act. So what other revenue sources could Hamilton look look at?
I mean, we're exercising pretty much everything that we have, right? The revenue sources available to Toronto are more expanded because of the City of Toronto Act. And with that said, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of municipalities that have been begging for the same sort of revenue sources, right? It is not as if the province brought in the City of Toronto Act and every municipality was like, count us into. We want the same powers, we want the same revenue sources, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I think Hamilton's revenue problems are very similar to other cities that you would see across the province. I don't think we've been, we I don't think we've been particularly active at sort of maximizing the tax increases we probably could do. So I think we could probably we could try out certain things, but I don't know if we could necessarily move into additional revenue areas like the city of Toronto could.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I find this very fascinating, and you can choose to comment or not. But just this is me just looking at how Hamilton politics just works, right? So you have, counselors, some have been around for a long time, and then some transition over to being provincial politicians or federal politicians. But yet, you know, we still don't have that transfer of solving issues, right? Like, why is it that a counselor can be a counselor for like 10 years, they make a transition to being an MPP, they don't they don't apply the knowledge or come up with interesting solutions to connect the two, right? and then some will then stay, then they make the transition to being an MP, and then they don't apply the knowledge there. Why do you think that doesn't happen outside of obviously being hyper partisan? That's why I didn't pick names, but I just find that very interesting, right? Because then when it's time to campaign, they use those same connections to do the campaigning, but when it comes to governing, they don't use those same connections to govern and come up with solutions.
Hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think it's certainly one that I would love to see posed to some of those counselors who have made the move. But I will say, it is sometimes very challenging to get direct funding for certain projects locally, right? So if you're an MP or MPP, you have to sort of wait for these little windows to open, right? Certain funds, certain programs, and really when these windows open, you have to leap through them, right? So it takes a while to make a case for to replace a highway or to get a certain infrastructure program done or a housing project or something like that. It takes time, and you have to sort of match need with political will, right? So I think even if you are a backbench MP in the government, or even if you're a cabinet minister, it can be very hard to say that this particular project in this city is more of a priority than the one that my colleague sitting next to me is saying I should be doing in Kingston or somewhere else, right? Because every single MPP is trying to get money locally, so there is a bit of internal competition, and then at the same time there's obvious checks and balances on that money, right? So administratively, your bureaucrats, your public servants are looking at each of these projects. They're doing due diligence. They are prioritizing them. I think it's good that we're not shooting money out the door of any level of government. We're doing a bit of intelligence about it. But with that said, that can take time. So I think it can be hard. I don't want to let any of them off the hook by any means. So I'm just providing a little bit of context around why it can be challenging. I think that we have seen certain councillors take that municipal experience with them to Queen's Park. So I think the premier, we were just talking about the strong mayor stuff. The premier is someone who I think has brought that one term of municipal office experience with him and done quite a bit with, right? I think that
Mhm.
it's just a lot of people wouldn't necessarily agree that that's the stuff he should be doing,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
he is a person who sat there and looked at you know the trouble getting things done at City Hall, and he said, you know what, the problem here is that there's too many counselors, and the mayor is too weak, and the mayor should have more control over structuring the government, and that's it. So he diagnosed the problem in a very different way. So some of those people who have made the leap, could see things differently. They could say, well, the problem with Toronto is that it doesn't have enough revenue sources. It doesn't have this or that, right? So they see the problem in very different ways as well. But the municipal experience, I think, colors, how they approach government as well.
I'm glad you provided that example. So my question, and if Chris L is watching this, he won't be happy if I don't ask you this. So
Uh,
he would say, okay, well then where is the, if we wanted to be political, that's a conservative response to addressing the issue. Well, where is the leftist response to addressing the issue, right? Do
mm,
we see that in left, again, in inverted commas, politicians that are trying to do that? Because you are right in saying that, yes, you have a premier Doug Ford. He has said, if I were to ever be premier, these are the things I would do. But then when it comes to the other folks on the other side of the spectrum, we don't see any of them doing that. So is there an example, or could you say why that is not being done most of the time?
like why aren't politicians on the left getting elected
Yes.
provincially and changing things? Um,
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a great answer to that. I think they need to get elected, right? They need to see, right? So I mean, with that said, we're maybe the NDP wins the next provincial election, right? Would that create a different attitude around housing or anything? I probably, right? The NDP sees things very very differently than the PCs do, or the liberals. So, I think it really comes down to political fortunes, right? I mean, if you can make a case to get elected, you can do stuff, right? So I would kind of say, like, let's wait and see how things shake out. But winning entitles you to do a lot of things, right? But even with that said, I think that even if the NDP were to form a government next election, there's a host of internal challenges around systematic change, right? These are large organizations, with a massive amount of resources. It takes time to change them,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that there would still be a whole host of challenges there, but it all starts with getting elected, I guess.
Yeah. So, but it didn't take a long time for Doug Ford to change things.
No, no, no. But with that said, I mean, I think that it's important to recognize that what he has done may not have been exactly what he would have wanted to have done. So what I mean by that is, I think we look at what the changes that the premier has made to the municipal landscape across Ontario, and
Mhm.
I'm actually writing a chapter for a book called "The Politics of Ontario" right now. It's a textbook, and I have a section there where I just sort of labeled Doug Ford, Ontario's mayor, and sort of went through all the
Uh,
changes that he's done, right? And I think with a couple of things that are interesting there, we haven't had a premier before who stepped up to that level of government and become premier directly from serving, if we're actually being one term removed from being a city councillor,
mhm.
right? Usually people, serve time in cabinet, and he jumped up quite quickly.
Mhm.
Um, and with that said, I don't know if we really assume what the full scope of what he would have wanted to do, right? Certainly, the change that he has made, and as comparison to his predecessors, has been quick, and it's been seismic. But it may not have been everything that he wanted to do. So when we think back to his first term, we certainly saw some big change with the size of council, within the city of Toronto. But the other
Mhm.
big thing was the regional government review
Mhm.
that he decided not to do anything with them. We're certainly seeing some change on the regional government side now, but there's a number of reasons why I think he held back the first time, and some of those were political, right? I think there was some
Okay.
people saying to the premier, like, "Hey, we have an election coming up. I don't know if we want to start amalgamating governments right now. I don't know if it's fully within the host of issues that could win us re-election. So let's pull back a bit, focus on X, Y, and Z instead, and we'll go out there." So I don't know if he's had the opportunity to do everything that he really wants to yet. So
Mhm.
maybe it's just a stay tuned situation, but maybe he wanted to do a lot more. Who knows?
Okay. Okay. So we have about 12 minutes or so. So this is the time where I hand it over to you and say, what are some of the innovative things that maybe municipalities should be looking at, or maybe provincial government should be looking at to make things a little easy for municipalities.
Um, so just off the top of my head, I mean, the one thing I would sort of mention, and to go back in, is the sort of who does what discussion, right? And I think that it's something that we've done before. We've had a province-wide who does what panel, and I think we're probably at the point in time where we need to sit down and have a tough conversation about who should be doing what. The liberal government, engaged in a little bit of this uploading, after we saw a lot of downloading in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I think it's probably time to do one of those again. We're kind of at this 20-year cycle where we need to, I think, reevaluate what the federal government should be doing, what the provincial government should be doing, and what municipalities ought to be doing. We should have a really serious look about the revenue tools that are available two municipal governments across the province. And I don't know if that is innovative, but it would certainly be a change in direction about how we've done things in the past, or at least for the last 20 plus years. So I think it's time to get serious about thinking about which order of government is best placed to deliver which services and how they should be paid for. And I think we're overdue for that particular conversation. We've done it before. We can do it again. I think it's high time to have that conversation.
Who would lead that? The provincial government?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think there is a bit of an opening here, right? That the premier is in the midst of some pretty serious changes to how governments operate locally across the province. We've seen the dissolution of Peel region. I suspect we'll probably see some more fairly large scale change with the other regional governments. I suspect we've done a bunch of changes to with the strong mayor legislation. We're going to see some more changes on the housing file. I think so. I think part of that includes putting a lot of accountability and responsibility upon municipalities to deliver on a host of things. Those regional governments are going to change a lot over the next couple of years, and those are the places that are really growing. So I think it's probably high time to say, well, if we're changing a lot of the governance, maybe we should think about the revenue side of things. Maybe we should think about the services. Maybe we should think about policy capacity. Maybe we should think about you know, um, thinking about some of these large cities in a very different way, right? We still, we have this sort of one size fits all document. Aside from Toronto, the city of Hamilton is treated very much in the same way legislatively as the town of Hamilton, which is on the other side of the GTA, right? So maybe we should, not think about ourselves as a small town, right? And I think that maybe it's time to have that conversation about what the big cities should be doing, what the mid sizes should be doing, what rural places should be doing, right? Because they're all very different. They have very different needs, and the fact of the matter is that provincially we want them all to do different things, right? I think that it's very clear that for a lot of those smaller rural governments, we want them to stay small and rural, right? Because those are special places for the people who live there, but they're also the heart of agricultural production, right? So let's have a conversation about how they feed into provincial priorities, which is namely feeding us, right? What do we want our large cities to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? These are places that are housing a lot of people. These are places that are taking on much different responsibilities around servicing, around housing and social services, healthcare services, public health, addictions. Right? There's a lot of stuff happening here that is not happening in a small town of 1,000 people in southwestern Ontario, right? So we need to have these conversations about different levels of capacity, different levels of responsibility. So I think we're at this inflection point where we can sit back and think about what we want our municipalities to do, and not just do for their own residents, but to do for the province as a whole, right? What role are they playing for everyone else, and how are we feeding into the guiding principles of what this province is supposed to be doing? So all to say, it's time to talk. It's time to have a very serious responsibility, and I think it's time to bring cities to the table as policymakers, to be very real about their limits, about the capacities, and about their willingness to take on more and do more and to pay more.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's have the conversation.
Okay. No, that's good. So we have 5 minutes. What do you see being the crucial issues in the next election cycle, 2026, provincially or municipally, because they happen in the same year?
Yeah, yeah, it's weird how we're kind of synced up now, but I would say we should have mentioned it before, but housing is the big issue. I think that politicians of all stripes are going to have a very short shelf life if we can't demonstrate real meaningful progress on the housing file. And I think there are certain politicians who I think are taking this very seriously, and there's some that aren't. And so I think that the big issue is going to be housing. And I think a lot of the issues around housing that we're going to see over the next couple of years are really going to be about the kind of fraying social contract that we have. So I think we're going to start talk. We're now we're obviously talking about who has a roof over the head, but I think we're going to talk about more about intergenerational fairness. We're going to talk about social cohesion. The housing debate, I think, is going to be more intertwined with the immigration debate. It's going to be more intertwined with the financial debate about the taxes and everything else. So I think that politicians, who risk losing control over the housing file, or risk losing control over the rest of their own political agenda, and that the housing file, I think, is going to consume a lot of the other policy space that we have out there. So I think that that's the issue, and I think that there's a lot of politicians who understand they have a very short runway to make some meaningful action here. But I think that we could see some pretty seismic change in terms of people not being reelected if we don't get a good handle on this thing.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been a very interesting conversation. I learned a lot. That's why we definitely made sure we reached out to you so that you could share that knowledge. Can you tell folks before we head out? Can you tell folks about your book and where
Sure.
people can get it and what the book is about?
Sure. So I have a couple out. My latest one is called Delivery by Design, and it's all about intermunicipal contracting and service sharing. So how cities work together to provide for service and policy continuity. It's out from University of Toronto Press. I have another book called The Platform Economy in the Smart City with McGill Queen's Press, co-edited with my good friend Austin Zwick, and we have a number of chapters there about how municipalities are using technology and adapting to a new world where things like data governance is hugely important. And another book is called The Boundary Bargain, where we where I talk about amalgamation and the county and regional government system across Ontario. So I think all three could be purchased from Amazon. I also have the textbook as well, but I'm sure that's of much less interest to those who aren't being forced to buy it in my classes. But
Yeah, well, there you go. We here at Kojo's Quarter, we're all about people, participation, politics, and power. And I think, sometimes when we have discussions about governing, you need proper information, you need researched information so that you can make decisions. So we're glad you were able to join us. So for those of you looking for books to read for the rest of the summer and into the fall, go get a book by Dr. Zachary Spicer, and you can check him out. He has a website, and he also teaches at York University. For those of you that go to York University, you can look for one of his courses. So thank you very much, and
thank you.
we will see everyone possibly in September, and we'll let you know who our next guest is. Just follow us on Instagram, Kojo's Corner, and you get some updates of who we'll be talking to on episode 4. See you later.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Take care.
Bye.
All right, we'll see you.